Hello, everyone. On behalf of Lībra Terra Publishing House, I would like to thank all of you for joining and taking part in this webinar. My name is Olga, and today I will be facilitating this webinar for you. We decided to create this webinar because we understand that many of you are thinking, how should I as a teacher handle listening? Especially if we think about our students who are going to take final exams very soon. So before we begin, actually, I would like to ask you to write down whether you can see and hear me well. So if you can see and hear me well, please type yes in the chat box. Okay, thank you. I see the first comments. So you can see and hear me very well. That's wonderful. If you have some problems during our broadcast, you can always try to relog and come back again to our YouTube channel. So just some other technical information about our webinar. This webinar will be posted later on our YouTube channel, so please subscribe to this channel to be able to watch it later. And at the end of this webinar, there will be a chance to ask questions. So I encourage you, if you have questions, please save them for later. Okay, now we will move on and maybe start with a little introduction. So my name is Olga Timchak, and I have been working as an English teacher for over 15 years. Right now, I am an ELT methodologist for Lībra Terra, and I also work for an online school and IT company teaching English. As I like to say, English is my passion and my profession, and I think it's probably true for the most of you. And now I would really like to know who we have here today with us at this webinar. So could you please write down in the chat, in the right part of your screen, the city where you're from, and also how many years have you been teaching English? I'm really interested to know the audience today. Okay, I'm getting the first answers. I see Lubny, Kilia, Kremenchuk, and the number of years, 10, 13, 2. Okay, I see Cherkasy, Lutsk, Kherson. Oh, some people have really great experience, 25, 30 years. I'm impressed. 30 years from Kyiv, Lubny. Okay, thank you very much for posting all of your comments. We have over 400 participants registered for this webinar. I'm very happy that you could attend. So I will try to keep this webinar as practical as possible. And we will proceed. So, okay, I'll read some other names of the cities first. Romny, Sosnitsa, Dnipro. Okay, and the number of years are quite different. So we have a lot of experienced teachers, and then we have teachers who maybe just started in the profession. I think each one of you will be able to get something from this webinar. Okay, I see somebody from Ternopil as well. Yeah, welcome everyone to the webinar. Okay. Now, as we are done with introductions, we can move on. And on this slide, you can see a little agenda for today. So what are we going to talk about? First, I will talk about things that can make listening comprehension difficult, right? Some factors that can influence the comprehension or even block the comprehension sometimes. Then we will be talking about various strategies that your students need to learn in order to be able to pass their exams successfully, of course, but also to be successful with their comprehension in real life. And the next question I will be talking about is related to the additional resources. So I will be speaking about online and offline resources you can use when you're working on listening with your students. And at this point, we will also have a special bonus or offer for all of the participants. So please be patient, wait until the very end of this webinar, and you will be able to get a special gift from us. At the very end of the webinar, you will have a chance to ask some questions. So as you are listening, please note down the questions that you have, but don't post them in the chat yet, okay? So at the end of the webinar, I will be able to answer all of them, hopefully. And if not, you are always welcome to send me an email, and we will be posting the email address in the chat box throughout the webinar, so you have my contact information, so we can stay in touch after this. All right. Now, this is a funny slide, and I decided to start my presentation with it because I think it's interesting. And please study the conversation between these two gentlemen. So they are obviously from England, traveling on a train. They are strangers, and they are getting closer to the station, and they are having this conversation. So one gentleman asks, "Is this Wembley?" The other one answers, "No, it's Thursday." "So am I. Let's go and satisfy our beer butts." So what I want you to do now is to analyze this conversation closely, and in the chat, please write down which two words did these two gentlemen confuse. Okay, but remember, you have to write two words, not one, two words. Okay, I see the first correct answer. Okay, I want to give a chance to more people to reply, and then I will comment on this. Okay, it's very nice that we have teachers present here. So I see lots of correct answers in the chat. So of course, the first word is Wembley. It was confused with Wednesday. And the second word is Thursday, confused with the word thirsty, right? So this is just to illustrate why listening is important, not just for exams, but for real life, of course. The next slide I have for you has pictures with faces of various students who perhaps didn't understand something. So now in the chat box, I would also like you to write a plus sign if you have seen such faces in your classroom. I know I have seen them in mine, but I'm interested to know, like, do your students have problems with listening as well? Okay, I see some people writing even the letters, yeah, of the students they see in their classrooms. Yeah, B, D, A. So the majority of you wrote pluses, right? So this is a common problem, I suppose, for all of us, right? And well, today at the webinar, we will try to understand why this happens, right? Why is listening difficult? And then what can we as teachers do to help our students to make it less difficult? When I was preparing this webinar for you, I also remembered a funny story that happened to me a couple of years ago, which involved listening comprehension. At that time, I was working as an interpreter for a group of journalists from Ukraine who went to the USA for an experience exchange. And one day we were invited to the office of the city mayor where we stayed. And you can see this man on the picture here. He was a very nice, pleasant gentleman. He showed us around his wonderful office, and he was telling us about his work as a mayor. And we also learned that he was a lawyer in the past. So then he used a sentence that confused me. He said, "Once I had a meat kleptomania." Well, this is what I've heard. I was obviously very surprised. So I tried to clarify, "Do you mean you like to steal meat from the supermarket?" And then this gentleman started to laugh. And he tried to explain to me that he was actually talking about his client who had this problem. So the problem for me was that I didn't hear one sound at the end, right? Just one sound matters. This story ended well, of course. We had a good laugh about it. I was able to clarify this and to translate it correctly. But I was very lucky that it was a two-way listening. And I had the chance to ask questions, clarify, and so on. However, if we go back to our students, we may find, they may find themselves in the situation where they don't have a chance to ask questions. And during this webinar, we will talk about things or strategies they can use in those situations. For example, during their examinations. If we could travel back in history, we would see that listening comprehension did not always have a prominent role in language instruction. Listening was actually called a Cinderella skill by one of the linguists. In the 1950s, 1960s, most teachers spent a lot of time on oral drills and encouraged their students to practice new phrases orally, sometimes phrases the students didn't even understand. However, in the 70s, listening came into fashion. It was connected to the ideas expressed by James Asher in his work on total physical response. Perhaps some of you have heard about this approach before. So in this approach, listening comprehension was given a major prominence, and learners were given great quantities of language to listen before they were asked to respond. Nowadays, if we look at 2019, I think listening is having greater and greater importance in our classrooms. I don't think any of you will argue that listening comprehension is essential, both for the interaction and learning processes. As we are thinking about designing the best lessons for our students that include listening components, we need to consider some special characteristics of the spoken language. These factors will strongly influence the processing of speech by our students and may even block comprehension if we don't pay attention to them. Therefore, in the following part of our webinar, we will talk about things that can make the listening comprehension difficult. We will concentrate in particular on clustering, reduced forms, rate of delivery, and interaction. I would like to stress that these are not the only factors that can make listening difficult, just some of the ones I believe our students may have problems with. And so we will begin with clustering. I think the cluster of grapes is a wonderful visual representation of the spoken language. When we speak, it is natural for us to break the speech into clusters or chunks, which are smaller groups of words. Thus, when we teach listening comprehension, we need to help students pick these manageable chunks of language. I don't know about you, but my students often find themselves in two extreme situations. Some students try to understand very long chunks, a whole sentence, or even several sentences. And they often fail because our memory does have certain limitations. Other students try to process every single word in a sentence, and they get frustrated as well because this is just too difficult. So the question is, how can we help our students with this problem? One activity that I suggest you may use is on the left side of this, in the bottom of this slide. It's a gap fill activity from one of our textbooks. Perhaps some of you will remember this exercise, which is part of the topic It's Your Planet, where students are asked to listen to a mini lecture about acid rain. As one of the listening tasks, you may offer them to fill in the blanks with phrases or so-called chunks. So, not just one word and not a whole sentence, just a manageable piece of language. In the lower part of the slide, you see an example of this sentence, and it was a part of this mini lecture. You can see that the sentence is really long. So it's obviously, for students, it's rather hard to process it when they listen. So you can break it down into clusters. And I can't tell you how short or how long these clusters should be. Just remember, this should be something manageable. So you know the level of your students, use your good judgment, think about the abilities of your students, and break these long sentences into the chunks. And try to give this activity to practice for your students. Another significant difficulty that classroom learners may have is related to the reduced forms of the language. In one of the articles I found online, I have seen an interesting term called Motherese. It was used to describe the language some teachers are using with their students, speaking English very slowly and articulating every word very carefully, using very proper grammar. I just tried to demonstrate you this Motherese. This approach may be good for students as they begin to speak English, but this will not help more advanced students when they are in real world with native speakers. And these native speakers are not going to make it easier for your students. So they will not modify their speech to suit your students' needs. On this slide, you can see some of the examples of reductions in the English language. They are very natural for native speakers, and they don't even notice them. For a second language learner, however, this is confusing, and even simple sentences can be incomprehensible. For this reason, I believe every ESL student should have at least some instruction on these reductions in English. As teachers, we may try to give our students as much practice as possible. For example, include listening to some informal dialogues into the lessons, because this is where these reduced forms are often used. In general, try to develop a flexible approach to listening in your students. They need to understand that pronunciation of certain words and phrases may be different from what they are used to. Another comment that I'm sure many of you hear from virtually every student is, of course, oh, native speakers just speak too fast. So here we will talk about rate of delivery or speed, actually. Unlike reading, where a person can stop and read a sentence again, in listening, the hearer may not always have a chance to stop the speaker. The only answer to this problem, as I see it, is practicing listening to various speakers who have various rates of delivery. Eventually, your students will be able to understand language at various rates of speech, and the key here is just not to give up too soon. One more factor which may cause problems for many students is the interactive nature of listening. In the classroom, our students often act as passive overhearers of conversations. For example, they may listen to a lot of monologues where they don't have a chance to answer back or clarify understanding. In the real world, however, Our students will rarely be in the role of passive participants. As a part of my job, I was just working with many people who were planning to go abroad. Some of these people have been learning English for years, and they still didn't know how to negotiate their meaning. So some simple sentences or phrases, how do you ask for clarification, or give feedback, or maintain conversation? They just didn't know how to do this. So I encourage all of you to understand that good listeners in conversations are also good responders. One of the ways to practice this interactive listening is any kind of chain activity when listeners learn to respond to what they hear and continue this chain of listening and responding. Try to involve your students into various discussions, debates, role plays, and other forms of group and pair work. In this way, their listening skills will be integrated with their speaking. Okay, so far we have discussed some of the factors that make listening difficult. Now let me take a short break to check about the sound. Can you hear me well? On a scale from 1 to 10, please write down how well can you hear me at the moment. So if you hear me perfectly, put 10, and if you can't hear me at all, put 1, okay? Or anything in between. Thank you. Okay, I'm getting the first comments, so the sound is working well. Okay, very happy to hear that. Okay, so now let's proceed to the next part of our webinar, which is related to learner strategies. And on this slide, you can see the nice definition for the strategy, right? So learner strategy includes any set of operations, steps, plans, routines that learners use to learn and regulate their learning. The problem for many of my students, I think, and perhaps for yours as well, is that they just don't know how to listen. Our main task is, of course, to teach learners how to listen. These strategies can also become an important part of their chances to pass their final exams successfully. This part of the webinar will be more interactive. We will discuss various listening strategies, and I will ask you some questions, and you will be able to type your answers in the chat box in the right part of your screen. So please be patient. Understand that there are many participants present here, and I may not be able to read all of your comments, but I will do my best. Anyway, let us move on now. On this slide, you see the strategies we will be discussing today. Once again, this list is not complete, but because of the time constraints, we will cover these 4 strategies that I think may be particularly helpful for your students. So we will speak about predicting a speaker's purpose, listening for the general gist, looking for keywords, and guessing meanings. The first strategy is called predicting speaker's purpose. Prediction is an activity learners carry out before listening. This gives them a reason to listen, as they confirm or reject their predictions. So now what I want you to do is to study the picture of this lady you see on this slide. Her name is Penny Palmano, and she wrote a book about teenagers. Now in the chat box, please try to answer the following question. What kind of attitude does she have towards teenagers? Basically, it's a choice between 2 words. Is her attitude negative or positive? So look at the picture, study it, and try to explain. Or not explain, just write the word positive or negative in the chat. Okay, very well. I see I see all the answers and they are all correct again. So you all did a very good job again. If you were my students, I would then ask you to explain. Why do you think so? Why is she positive? And then some of you may say, maybe this lady is smiling. She looks happy. Her book is called Respect to Teenagers. Then students would listen to the audio file and confirm their ideas. Prediction can be a valuable stage in many listening activities. Please remember that you can predict both language and content. For example, I could also ask you about what adjectives will she use to describe teenagers. Actually, whenever there is an illustration that goes along with the listening task, I try to start with the prediction activity of some kind, and I encourage you to do the same. The next strategy, which is rather valuable in listening, is listening for the gist. When the learners try to understand what is happening, even if he or she can't understand every phrase or every sentence, the learner is trying to pick up keywords, intonation, some other clues in order to guess the meaning. On this slide, you can see an example of a listening for gist activity, where learners are asked to identify the main message that the speaker is trying to convey. Some other examples of gist questions may be, what problem are they discussing? Or, what does the speaker think about the topic? Or, look at the pictures. What are the speakers talking about? So I encourage once again to use all of these questions, examples, so very, very valuable tool. The next strategy is rather well known as well for you. I'm sure all of you have heard about the keywords and the importance of them for English language. So on this slide, you can see part of the text about Thanksgiving. And I would like you to concentrate on the very first sentence in big red letters. Could you please study this sentence carefully and in the chat write down the keywords? Which words are key here in this sentence? Perhaps I will read the sentence to you. On Thanksgiving Day, many Americans get together with their families, celebrate and eat a lot. Which words are key here? Okay, I see the first comments. Thanksgiving Day, turkey, family, eat, Americans, get together, turkey. Okay. Once again, it's very easy with teachers because I see lots of correct answers here. Now, to give you some ideas as to what categories of words are usually keywords, I will share the following slide. So, when looking for keywords, you are basically looking for names, locations, dates, numbers, nouns, and verbs. One idea for the activity that you could use with your students, you could divide a class, a big group, into smaller groups, play the audio file and give the task before playing the audio file. One group should be looking for names in this audio. The other group should be looking for locations. The next one for dates. Then ask the students to work in groups first, discuss this, then ask them to write the words on the board. Yes, you can make 4 columns, write down 4 columns, discuss then all these words together as a class, as a big group. So in this way, you could help train your students, right? Looking for keywords is rather important. And last but not least is, of course, context. Perhaps you have heard the phrase that context is the king. So context is a very broad term, actually. By context, we mean the knowledge of the topic, the speakers and their relationships to the situation and each other. We may also speak about the context of a sentence or context of a paragraph. Now, at the bottom of this slide, once again, you see a sentence from a listening task about Thanksgiving. Let us imagine, let us pretend you don't know the word mashed. Please give it some thought and try to write down in the chat what factors may help you. Pretend you don't know the word. Describe the process of thinking, okay? How would you guess the meaning of this word? What will help you in this process? Okay, I see somebody put context, but please clarify, what kind of context do you mean? Okay, of course, you're all right. You're using context to guess the meaning. Some of you write number 2 and number 1. Okay, in this particular case, well, you can look at the word itself, the way it's formed, right? So it comes before the noun, so we understand it's probably an adjective, right? You look at the structure of the word, you see the ending ed, so you as well understand this. This is probably an adjective. You can also use number 3, actually. If your students have seen a film about Thanksgiving Day, perhaps they have seen the dish, right? They have seen the turkey and potatoes next to it, and they would remember that, okay, this is not fried potatoes, this is probably mashed potatoes, right? So very good, thank you. And we will proceed with another useful, I believe, part of our webinar, because many teachers are wondering what kind of resources should I use, like how to help my students even more additionally, right? So on this slide, you can see very nice links that I have personally used myself and I recommend you to do. The first one is actually a combination of various topics. You can choose the topic you're interested in, and then you will have a little monologue based on this topic, and each monologue lasts for about 60 seconds. And it's, I think, very nice collection of topics, and the level is rather good for the learners of high schools. Then the next one is called listenandwrite.com. This is an activity you may encourage your students to do at home. So this is what it is. Students listen first and then write the sentences they hear, and they see it corrected right away on the screens. So makes it very visual, very practical to do. But my favorite one is actually number 3. This site is called lyricstraining.com. I think many of your students will probably like it as well, because this site is about music and learning English through music. So there is a possibility to open a YouTube clip there. And there is even a certain gaming element there, because the students can choose the level, like advanced level. For advanced level, you would have to write down all the words in the song that you are listening to. But for a beginner level, maybe some of the words that are missing you will be asked to fill in the blanks. You may try to do this during the class, of course, if you have the computers available. But in general, this could also be like a good practice for homework if you know that some of your students especially are fond of music. So I encourage you to use this site, at least to have a look at it. Then, of course, we at Lібра Терра are always trying to help you and to help your students to get ready for the exams better. So we today are offering 3 wonderful books that we have published. They are divided according to the level. So we have a book for B1, B2, and A2 levels. So all of these books, they include audio files, listening exercises, and full transcripts for audio files. As I have promised earlier, we do have a special gift as a way of saying thank you to you for spending your Saturday morning with us. So those of you who are interested can purchase these books with a discount of 25%. I believe it's a very nice, generous discount. And if you look at the prices, they are all very affordable. So please pay attention that these prices will be valid only for 3 days. So don't wait too long. Try to order today, tomorrow, or on Monday. And don't forget to include the promo code. The word is LISTEN. Okay? Good. And I also want to encourage you to continue visiting our website because we are thinking about some other books to publish which may help your students in preparation for their final exams. This particular book will be devoted especially to listening skills. So there will be a lot of audios available there, all authentic and very good quality. So I think in the chat box we will write down the address of our website, and many of you, I'm sure, already know it and use it. So please stay updated, okay? So we have a lot of useful content for you. The very last thing I wanted to mention in the main part of my presentation is, of course, motivation. So don't forget to motivate your students. I know there are lots of frustrated faces sometimes, and I think our role as teachers is just to encourage our students, right? Just to say that, okay, maybe I don't understand something today, but at least I'm moving in the right direction, so I'm on the right track. So practice and hard work will, of course, bring good results in listening and in any other kind of skills. Okay, we are done with the main part of our presentation. On this slide, you can see the contact information. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. We are planning to have more webinars for you related to the topics of English language instruction. So you will be able to just to use all this useful content. And if you have any questions in relation to this webinar, you are welcome to send it by email. Now I will try to close down this presentation, and now is a good time for you to ask some questions. But please understand, we have lots of members here, and try to keep your questions close to the topic of our webinar, okay? I understand you may have a lot of questions, but try to make it short and sweet, okay?